I found the papers tucked neatly between the electric bill and a catalog for luxury watches. Divorce documents with David's signature already dried on the dotted line. 15 years of marriage concluded in cold legal terms while I'd been at my mother's bedside in hospice care. I stood motionless in our marble kitchen, the kitchen I designed 3 years ago during the renovation David had called unnecessarily extravagant, the same kitchen where he had just deposited these papers, without even the courtesy of a conversation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. There's someone else, he texted an hour earlier. It's serious. Papers are on the counter. I'll be staying at the Meridian Hotel until you've had time to process. We can talk when you're ready. Process. As if my marriage ending was simply another project to manage, another item on my to-do list between visiting my dying mother and preparing for my upcoming surgery. The surgeon had found a suspicious mass during my annual mammogram 2 weeks ago. David knew this. He'd held my hand during the biopsy, promised we'd face whatever came next together. Another promise casually discarded, it seemed. Everyone's path to success contains unexpected detours. Mine began with this perfect storm of betrayal, a husband leaving during my most vulnerable moment, a mother dying across town, and my own health hanging in precarious balance. What happened next would transform not just my circumstances, but my entire understanding of strength, strategy, and self-worth. I flipped through the divorce agreement, the familiar letterhead of Colton, and Byrne jumping out at me, David's law firm. His colleagues had drafted this, probably over drinks and knowing laughter. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached the financial settlement page. Despite my MBA and years as a financial analyst before I'd left my career to support David's, I found myself struggling to focus on the numbers through the fog of betrayal. One paragraph jumped out at me. David would assume responsibility for our shared debts. All of them, including the remaining $212,000 on my student loans from Wharton, that we'd agreed to pay off slowly while prioritizing investments, including the $86,000 renovation loan for this kitchen with its custom Italian marble countertops, including the $43,000 in medical bills from last year's emergency gallbladder surgery my insurance hadn't fully covered. It was unexpectedly generous. Suspiciously so. David Madison didn't make financial decisions without calculating every angle, every potential gain and loss. It was what made him one of Boston's most sought-after corporate attorneys. It was what had attracted me to him in our law school days, his brilliant strategic mind, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. My phone vibrated against the counter. Another text from David. Lauren agreed to take on our debts as part of our new start. She says it's the least she can do considering the circumstances. Lauren. So the other woman had a name, and apparently a savior complex, and enough financial resources to casually absorb over $340,000 in someone else's debt. Lauren, who was getting my husband, my house, and my future in one neat package, while I stood in my soon-to-be former kitchen with a mother dying across town and a possible cancer diagnosis looming over me like a storm cloud. I set my phone down carefully before the urge to shatter it against the wall became overwhelming. My reflection in the window above the sink showed a woman I barely recognized, pale, drawn, with dark circles under her eyes from too many nights, spent on the fold-out chair in my mother's hospice room. David hadn't visited my mother once in the 3 weeks she'd been there. Now I understood why. I forced myself to breathe deeply, the way my therapist had taught me during the panic attacks, that had started after my father's sudden death 2 years ago. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. The fog of shock began to lift slightly, making room for something else. Not quite anger, not yet. Something colder, more calculated. I picked up the divorce papers again, this time reading every line with the attention I once gave to multi-million-dollar investment portfolios. The settlement was comprehensive, almost suspiciously so. In addition to assuming all our debts, David was offering me our vacation property in the Berkshires and a one-time payment of $175,000. In exchange, I would relinquish any claim to our primary residence, our investment accounts, and his partnership, shares at Colton and Byrne. It was, by any objective measure, an inadequate settlement given Massachusetts's equitable distribution laws and the length of our marriage. But David knew, just as I did, that prolonged legal battles were expensive. He was betting on my exhaustion, my distraction with my mother's illness, and perhaps even my diagnosis to push me toward accepting a quick, clean break. The familiar rhythm of problem-solving began to pulse in my mind. For 15 years, I'd channeled my analytical skills into managing our household, into supporting David's career ascent, into navigating the healthcare maze for my parents. I'd become so accustomed to directing my talents toward other people's problems that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to turn them toward my own. I glanced at the clock, 11:23 p.m. Mom would be asleep now, the night nurse checking her vitals hourly as the cancer that had started in her breast and metastasized to her bones continued its inevitable march. 3 to 6 weeks, the hospice doctor had said. That had been 3 weeks ago. I picked up my laptop from the kitchen counter, the one David had given me for Christmas last year, with a post-it note that read, "For my favorite planner." I opened a new document and titled it simply, Strategy. As I began to type, a sense of calm purpose replaced the initial shock. The lawyer in me, the woman who had graduated second in our class at Harvard Law before choosing a different path, was awakening after a long dormancy. I would need that woman now. The strategist, the planner, the one who could see 3 steps ahead. I worked until 3 a.m., making lists, reviewing our financial entanglements, and researching Massachusetts divorce law. When I finally closed my laptop, I had the skeleton of a plan. Not for fighting the divorce. David clearly wanted out, and I had too much pride to cling to someone who could discard me so easily. No, this was a plan for something else entirely. My phone buzzed again. David. Just checking in. Are you okay? Need anything? The audacity was almost admirable. Was I okay? Need anything? Just my dignity, my health, my mother not dying, and my husband not leaving me for someone named Lauren who was apparently wealthy enough to casually absorb hundreds of thousands in debt. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the room we'd shared for over a decade, and opened David's closet. His scent still lingered among the precisely arranged designer suits and casual wear. I ran my fingers along the sleeve of his favorite charcoal Tom Ford, the one he wore to close important deals. His power suit, he called it. Half of his clothes were missing, I realized. He'd been planning this methodically, removing his belongings in small batches I wouldn't notice while distracted by my mother's declining health and my own medical concerns. How strategic. How very David. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, suddenly bone-tired, but knowing sleep wouldn't come. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, clear anger that felt alien and familiar all at once. David had always said I was too accommodating, too willing to compromise. "That's why you need me," he joked once during a dinner with his colleagues. "Someone has to look out for your interests since you're too busy looking out for everyone else's." He'd been wrong. I wasn't naturally accommodating. I had chosen to be. I had chosen to channel my ambition and intelligence into supporting our partnership, into creating the stable foundation from which he could take risks and pursue opportunities. I had made strategic sacrifices, deferring my own career advancement for what I believed was our collective benefit. Now, sitting alone in our half-empty bedroom with divorce papers downstairs and a possible cancer diagnosis hanging over me, I recognized that choice for what it was: a miscalculation, a failed investment strategy. My phone lit up with a notification, an email this time, not from David, but from someone named Lauren Westfield. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I deleted it without reading. Lauren Westfield didn't get to apologize. Not yet. Not until she understood exactly what she was apologizing for. I opened my laptop again and added a new section to my strategy document. Lauren Westfield. A quick LinkedIn search revealed exactly what I expected. Harvard Business School, Executive VP at Boston Capital Partners, board member for 3 prestigious cultural organizations, 41 years old, 2 years younger than me, with a smile that radiated confidence and old money. She'd met David 6 months ago when Boston Capital Partners retained Colton and Byrne for a complex acquisition. According to her public Instagram, she'd recently purchased a brownstone in Beacon Hill, a $4, $2 million property, according to public records. No wonder she could casually offer to absorb our debts. To her, it was pocket change. To me, it had been a carefully managed burden, one more sacrifice in service to our shared future, a future that no longer existed. The hospice center called at 4:30 a.m. Mom was agitated and asking for me. I closed my laptop, splashed cold water on my face, and grabbed my keys. As I drove through Boston's empty pre-dawn streets, my mind continued to race, continued to build and refine the plan taking shape in my head. By the time I parked at the hospice center, I had made my first decision. I would not sign the divorce papers. Not yet. David wanted a clean, quick break. He would have to wait. I had always been good at waiting, good at playing the long game. It was time to remind my husband of that fact. It was time to remind myself. Mom was awake when I entered her room, her once vibrant face now gaunt and pale against the white pillowcase, but her eyes, my eyes, people always said, were clear and focused. "He's leaving you," she said immediately. Not a question. I nodded, taking her fragile hand in mine. "Yes, for someone else." "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her features, whether from the cancer or from my news. I couldn't tell. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been in days. I looked into my mother's eyes, the woman who had raised me alone after my father abandoned us when I was 7, the woman who had worked 2 jobs to put me through undergraduate school, the woman who had celebrated every one of my achievements as if it were her own. "I'm going to do what you taught me," I answered, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm going to take care of myself." A slight smile curved her lips. "Good," she whispered. "It's about time." As the sun rose over Boston, casting long shadows through the hospice room window, I sat beside my mother's bed making calls. To my doctor, rescheduling my follow-up appointment. To a divorce attorney, not from David's firm, scheduling a consultation for the following day. To my own bank, where I still maintained a separate account my husband didn't know about, checking the balance and discussing withdrawal options. With each call, each small action, I felt my power returning. David had calculated that my mother's illness and my health scare would leave me too vulnerable to fight. He had made a critical error. He had underestimated me. He had forgotten who I was before I became Mrs. David Madison. He had forgotten Sarah Elizabeth Chen, the scholarship student who had worked her way from community college to Harvard Law through sheer grit and relentless determination. The woman who had graduated second in her class, bested only by him. The woman who had turned down a junior partnership at Goldman Sachs to support his career because she believed in their partnership. That woman wasn't gone. She had just been dormant, and now she was wide awake. By noon, as Mom drifted in and out of sleep, her pain momentarily managed by the morphine drip, I had the outline of a more detailed plan, not just for survival, but for something more complex, something worthy of the strategic mind David had once admired before he took it for granted. I would sign those divorce papers eventually, but first, I would ensure that when Lauren Westfield so generously took on our debts, she would be getting far more than she bargained for. Much, much more. My phone buzzed with another text from David. The lawyer needs to know when you'll be signing the papers. Lauren and I are hoping to close on a new place next month. I allowed myself a small, cold smile as I typed my response. I'm with Mom at hospice. We'll discuss the papers when she's gone. I need time to process, remember? His reply came almost instantly. Of course. Take all the time you need. I'm here if you need anything. I set the phone down and looked at my sleeping mother, the woman who had taught me that true strength often lies in patience, in careful planning, in the quiet accumulation of knowledge and resources. Watch me, Mom, I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear me through her morphine-induced sleep. Watch what your daughter can do. Outside the hospice window, Boston continued its Monday morning bustle, oblivious to the quiet war being declared in this small, sterile room. David and Lauren thought they had orchestrated the perfect exit strategy. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Because while David might have been the more celebrated lawyer in our marriage, I had always been the better strategist. And now, I had nothing left to lose. The divorce attorney's office occupied the 14th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise, deliberately several blocks away from Colton and Byrne, where David held his partnership. Mira Abry had come highly recommended by a law school classmate who'd mentioned her reputation for handling complex, high-asset divorces with surgical precision. Let me be clear, Mira said, her steel-gray hair pulled back in an immaculate bun as she reviewed the divorce agreement David had left me. This settlement is insultingly inadequate given your circumstances. I nodded, watching as she made notes with a fountain pen on a yellow legal pad. The hospice center had called that morning. Mom had had a comfortable night, which meant I could focus fully on this meeting. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. After a 15-year marriage where you subordinated your career to support his, you're entitled to a far more substantial settlement, she continued. She looked up, her eyes sharp behind designer frames. So why are we here? You mentioned a different approach. I don't want to fight the divorce, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. David wants out? Fine. But I want to control the timing and ensure the actual distribution of debts happens strategically. Mira set down her pen, folding her hands on the desk. Explain. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my emerging plan. Mira's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight raising of her eyebrows, the subtle nod of professional appreciation. It's unorthodox, she said finally, but legally sound, provided we execute each step correctly. She leaned forward. You realize this strategy depends on your husband's new partner being as wealthy as you believe, and on their relationship lasting through the finalizing of the divorce. David doesn't choose partners who aren't financially solid. He's not built that way, I replied. And from what my investigation shows, Lauren Westfield has the resources to absorb these debts 10 times over. Her family owns half of Martha's vineyard. And if your medical situation... Mira paused delicately. If I have cancer, I finished for her, then the timeline accelerates, but the strategy remains the same. I handed her a sealed envelope. These are my medical directives and power of attorney documents, just in case. Mira nodded, tucking the envelope into a folder. We'll need to file for a financial restraining order immediately. Given his behavior, there's significant risk. He might try to move assets. Already anticipated, I said, sliding across printouts of our account statements. I've been monitoring everything. So far, he's been careful not to touch our joint holdings. He's waiting for you to sign, Mira observed, thinking your vulnerability will make you eager to avoid conflict, a miscalculation on his part. As I left Mira's office, my phone buzzed with a text from the hospice nurse. Mom had asked for me. I texted back that I'd be there within the hour, then made one more stop, at Boston First National, where I'd maintained a separate account since before my marriage. The branch manager greeted me warmly. I'd known Carlos since my analyst days, when I'd helped his daughter secure a competitive internship. Everything's arranged as you requested, Mrs. Madison, he said, leading me to a private room. Though, I must say it's unusual to convert investments to cash on such short notice. Unusual times, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He slid a cashier's check across the table. $127.70, 34, 20, the full balance of my personal account, accumulated carefully over 15 years of marriage through freelance consulting. Projects David had been too busy to notice, and an inheritance from my grandmother he'd forgotten about. And the safe deposit box? I asked. Carlos handed me a key. Box 43, accessible only to you. He hesitated. Mrs. Madison, forgive me for overstepping, but if you're in any trouble... Not the kind you're thinking, I assured him. Just taking precautions during a life transition. At the hospice center, Mom was having a rare good day. Her pain was manageable, and her mind was clear. The hospice doctor had pulled me aside during my last visit to gently remind me that such rallies often preceded a final decline, a cruel gift of clarity before the end. You look different today, Mom observed as I arranged fresh flowers beside her bed. More like yourself. I smiled, taking her hand. I've been making arrangements. For me or for you? Her directness hadn't diminished with her body's failing. Both, I admitted. Mom, there's something I need to ask you. She nodded for me to continue. The money Dad left when he died, the insurance policy, you never spent it. Mom's lips curved in a knowing smile. You've been talking to Carlos. The account's still in your name, nearly untouched for 10 years. It was blood money, she said simply. Your father walked out on us, then had the audacity to die and leave us money as if that made up for everything. She squeezed my hand. I kept it because throwing it away seemed wasteful, but I never wanted to touch it. It's over $400,000 now, with the investments Carlos helped you make. Mom's eyes, still so sharp despite the morphine, studied my face. And you want to know if you can use it? I nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. I already changed the account, she said. 3 weeks ago, when they moved me here. It's in your name now. She paused. Whatever you're planning, Sarah, make it count. I leaned forward, kissing her papery cheek, breathing in the lavender scent she still insisted on wearing. I will. As I left the hospice at sunset, my phone vibrated with an incoming call. David. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message as I walked to my car. Sarah, it's been 5 days. I'm trying to be patient, but we need to move forward with the paperwork. Call me back, please. I deleted the message, starting my car and pulling out into Boston's evening traffic. David could wait. The first pieces of my strategy were falling into place, and timing was everything. Tomorrow I'd see the surgeon about my biopsy results. Tomorrow I'd learn if I was fighting for my future or simply securing my legacy. Either way, David and Lauren were about to learn a valuable lesson about debt, about obligation, about the true cost of betrayal. Life rarely prepares us for its most devastating blows. We imagine we know how we'd react to betrayal, to loss, to fear, until we're standing in our own kitchens, staring at divorce papers while our mothers lie dying across town. I had always prided myself on being prepared, on anticipating contingencies. David used to tease me about my exhaustive planning for every vacation, every home repair, every career move. Not everything can be managed, Sarah, he'd say with that indulgent smile that now seemed so condescending in retrospect. He was right, but not in the way he intended. Some things can't be managed, but they can be leveraged. Every crisis contains within it the seeds of opportunity, if you know where to look and have the courage to plant them. As I drove through Boston's gleaming streets, past the financial district where I'd once built investment strategies for wealthy clients, past the courthouse where David had won his most celebrated cases, past the restaurants where we'd celebrated, anniversaries and promotions and milestones, I felt a strange sense of liberation building beneath my grief. For 15 years, I had defined myself largely in relation to David, his wife, his support system, the stable force that enabled his meteoric rise. I had made peace with that role, finding purpose in our partnership, pride in our shared achievements. I had believed we were building something together. Now I understood the truth. I had been building his future, not ours. I had been an asset in his portfolio, valuable while appreciating, disposable when circumstances changed. Just another calculated transaction in the life of David Madison Esquire. The realization should have crushed me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. If I was just an asset to be discarded, then I would show him exactly what happens when you miscalculate an asset's value, when you underestimate its potential, when you fail to read the fine print on the contract you're so eager to terminate. My phone rang again as I pulled into my hotel's parking garage. Not David this time, but Melissa, my closest friend since college, calling from Tokyo where she was concluding a business trip. I just landed and got your message, she said, skipping any preamble. That absolute bastard. I'm booking the next flight home. Don't, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Finish your meetings. I've got this under control. Sarah, he left divorce papers while your mom is in hospice and you're waiting on a cancer diagnosis. That's not under control. That's a Category 5 shit hurricane. I laughed despite everything. The first genuine laugh in weeks. I've retained Mira Abery. The line went silent for a moment. The Mira Abery? The one who eviscerated that tech CEO last year? The very same. Okay, Melissa said, her tone shifting from rage to something like admiration. Maybe you do have this under control, but I'm still coming home early. No arguments. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long moment, watching other hotel guests come and go, business travelers, tourists, people whose lives were proceeding according to plan. How strange to be simultaneously envious of their normalcy and grateful for my clarity of purpose. I had spent 15 years building David Madison's dream life, 15 years enabling his success, 15 years believing in our partnership. Now I would spend the next 15 days, maybe more, maybe less, depending on tomorrow's diagnosis, ensuring he understood exactly what he was losing. Not just a wife, not just a support system, but a strategist every bit his equal. A woman, capable of seeing 3 steps ahead. The game had changed, the rules rewritten without my consent. But I had always been adaptable, always been resourceful, always been underestimated. David was about to discover that the quiet, accommodating woman he thought he'd married had been there by choice, not by nature. And now she was choosing something else entirely. Tomorrow would bring medical answers, legal maneuvers, financial restructuring. Tomorrow would set in motion the next phase of my plan. But tonight, in this quiet moment between devastation and action, I allowed myself to feel everything: the betrayal, the fear, the grief, and yes, the growing certainty that somehow I would emerge from this not just surviving, but transformed. Because that's what fire does. It destroys, yes, but it also forges, it tempers, it strengthens, and from its ashes, something new can rise, something unexpected, something powerful, something free. David Madison thought he was walking away from a marriage. He didn't realize he was walking into a masterclass in consequences, a lesson I was uniquely qualified to teach. I worked until 3 a.m., making lists, reviewing our financial entanglements, and researching Massachusetts divorce law. When I finally closed my laptop, I had the skeleton of a plan. Not for fighting the divorce. David clearly wanted out, and I had too much pride to cling to someone who could discard me so easily. No, this was a plan for something else entirely. My phone buzzed again. David. Just checking in. Are you okay? Need anything? The audacity was almost admirable. Was I okay? Need anything? Just my dignity, my health, my mother not dying, and my husband not leaving me for someone named Lauren, who was apparently wealthy enough to casually absorb hundreds of thousands in debt. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the room we'd shared for over a decade, and opened David's closet. His scent still lingered among the precisely arranged designer suits and casual wear. I ran my fingers along the sleeve of his favorite charcoal Tom Ford, the one he wore to close important deals. His power suit, he called it. Half of his clothes were missing, I realized. He'd been planning this methodically, removing his belongings in small batches I wouldn't notice while distracted by my mother's declining health and my own medical concerns. How strategic. How very David. Life teaches us in strange and sometimes painful ways. I had always believed that love was built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering support during life's darkest moments. Now I understood that for some people, for David, relationships were simply transactions, investments to be maintained while profitable and divested when a better opportunity presented itself. The realization was liberating in its clarity. If my marriage had been merely a business arrangement in David's eyes, then I would approach its dissolution with the same calculating precision he'd applied to ending it. The difference? He was underestimating his opponent. Standing in our bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of our shared life, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The initial devastating shock was transforming, crystallizing into something harder, clearer, more focused. They say that in moments of extreme clarity, time seems to slow down. For me, it wasn't time that slowed, but my thoughts that accelerated, racing ahead with a strategic vision I hadn't accessed in years. I remembered a case study from business school. A failing company targeted for hostile takeover had transformed its debt structure so completely that the predatory corporation ended up acquiring toxic assets that nearly destroyed them. The professor had called it the porcupine defense, making yourself so potentially painful to consume that the predator reconsiders. I smiled in the darkness of our bedroom. David and Lauren wanted a clean, simple transfer of assets and liabilities. They would discover that sometimes what appears to be a straightforward transaction conceals unexpected complications. I returned to my laptop, opening a new browser window. A few keystrokes brought me to the Massachusetts Secretary of State's business registration portal. By morning, I had the paperwork ready to establish a new limited liability company, Phoenix Capital Management. The name wasn't subtle, but then David had never appreciated my sense of irony. The next morning, I drove directly to the hospice center, arriving just as the shift changed. Mom was sleeping peacefully, her breathing shallow but regular. The night nurse, Elena, gave me a gentle smile as she updated her chart. She had a "Good night," Elena whispered. "Asked for you around 2 a.m. but went back to sleep before I could call." I nodded my thanks, settling into the chair beside Mom's bed. It was early, barely 7 a.m., but I had calls to make, discreet inquiries to former colleagues in finance, exploratory conversations about debt consolidation options, and most importantly, a consultation with a corporate structure specialist I'd known from my Goldman Sachs days. "Sarah Chen?" Raj Patel's voice held genuine warmth when he answered. "It's been, 6 years?" 7, I corrected, keeping my voice low to avoid disturbing Mom. "I need your expertise, Raj. Confidentially." "Of course, what can I help with?" "I'm establishing a specialized debt acquisition company and need a structure that provides certain strategic advantages." There was a brief pause. "This sounds more interesting than your usual trust fund management." "It is. Much more. Interesting." For the next 20 minutes, I outlined the framework of my plan. Raj asked precise, technical questions, occasionally making appreciative sounds as he grasped the elegant complexity of what I was proposing. "It's completely legal," he confirmed when I finished. "Ethically ambiguous in places, but legally sound if executed properly. You'll need a skilled contract attorney to draft the operating agreements." "I know several," I replied, thinking of my Harvard classmates who hadn't married their professional ambitions away. "May I ask what precipitated this sudden interest in specialized debt acquisition?" I glanced at my mother's sleeping form. Let's just say I've recently gained a new perspective on the true value of debts and obligations. After ending the call with Raj, I made a list of next steps. The LLC would need to be properly registered, bank accounts established, and legal documentation prepared. I would need to compile comprehensive details of all our outstanding debts, the student loans, medical bills, renovation costs, and any other obligations I could legitimately include. Most importantly, I would need to establish the precise timing of each step. Too fast, and David might become suspicious. Too slow, and he might find a way to restructure the settlement before I could implement my strategy. Mom stirred as I was finishing my notes. Her eyes, still sharp despite the morphine, found mine immediately. "You're plotting," she observed, her voice raspy but clear. I smiled, taking her hand. "Yes. Good. Tell me." I hesitated, unsure how much to share, how much would burden rather than reassure her. "Sarah Elizabeth Chen," she said, using my full name as she had when I was a child trying to hide something. "I am dying, not senile. Tell me what you're planning." And so I did, explaining the broad strokes of my strategy while omitting the more technical details that would only confuse or worry her. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her eyes closed. I feared she'd fallen asleep, or, worse, that my plan had disturbed her. Then she opened her eyes, and I saw something I hadn't seen in weeks. A spark of the fierce, indomitable Elizabeth Chen, who had raised me alone, who had worked 2 jobs to put me through school, who had never accepted defeat is final. "He always underestimated you," she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Even when he claimed to admire your intelligence, he never truly saw it." "No," I agreed. "He didn't." "This plan of yours," she continued, studying my face. "It's brilliant. Morally questionable in parts, but brilliant." I laughed softly, recognizing the same assessment Raj had made. "I learned from the best." She smiled, then grew serious. "Just be careful, Sarah. Revenge can consume you if you let it." "It's not just revenge," I said quietly. "It's justice and security. The settlement he's offering would leave me starting over at 43 with nothing but a vacation property and a one-time payment that won't last 3 years in Boston." Mom nodded, accepting this. "Then do what you must. Just promise me you'll find happiness when this is done." "I promise," I said, though in truth, happiness seemed like a distant, abstract concept, something from another life. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the hospice room quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitors and the occasional footsteps in the hallway. Mom drifted in and out of sleep while I continued my planning, researching debt consolidation, firms, reviewing our credit report, and making discreet inquiries about Lauren Westfield's financial standing. The picture that emerged confirmed my initial assessment. Lauren came from substantial family wealth, augmented by her own successful career in finance. Her recent brownstone purchase had been made in cash, according to property records. Taking on our debts would indeed be a minor inconvenience for someone of her resources, a small price to pay for her new beginning with David. Unless, of course, those debts weren't quite what they appeared to be. By mid-afternoon, I had sketched out the next phase of my plan in detail. Phoenix Capital Management would acquire all our outstanding debts. A perfectly legal transaction that would simply change the creditor. Then, using a series of complex financial instruments that I'd helped develop during my Goldman days, I would restructure those debts into something far more substantial. The beautiful irony? David and Lauren had offered to assume our debts as part of their clean break, their fresh start. They would honor that commitment, only to discover too late that what they were assuming had transformed into something much more significant than they'd anticipated. Mom woke again as I was closing my laptop. "You're still here," she said, sounding surprised. "Of course I am." "No, I mean you're still here. The real Sarah. I was afraid he'd taken that from you too." I understood what she meant. For years, I had subsumed my ambitions, my analytical skills, my strategic thinking into supporting David's career and managing our shared life. I had become, in many ways, an extension of his needs and goals, rather than a fully autonomous person, with my own. He tried, I admitted, but it turns out you can't really lose yourself unless you choose to. And I'm choosing something different now. She nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now go execute your plan. I'll still be dying tomorrow." I laughed despite myself, recognizing the dark humor that had always been part of Mom's approach to life's difficulties. "That's terrible. Cancer's terrible. Might as well be honest about it." She shooed me with her free hand. "Go. Do your financial wizard things. Make him regret underestimating you." I kissed her forehead, breathing in the lavender scent that somehow persisted despite the clinical smells of the hospice. "I'll be back tonight." "Bring me real food," she called as I reached the door. "Something that doesn't taste like sanitized cardboard." My next stop was Boston First National, where I met with Carlos to establish the banking infrastructure for Phoenix Capital Management. Having maintained my own accounts there throughout my marriage gave me an advantage. Carlos knew me as a client in my own right, not merely as David Madison's wife. "The corporate accounts will be established by end of day," he confirmed after reviewing the documentation I'd prepared. "And the line of credit has been preliminarily approved, pending final verification of the collateral." "Thank you, Carlos." I hesitated, then added, "This is all completely confidential, of course." His smile was knowing, but professional. "Of course, Ms. Chen, Boston First prides itself on client privacy." My use of my maiden name rather than Mrs. Madison hadn't escaped his notice. I'd forgotten how observant Carlos could be. From the bank, I went directly to the offices of Hartman and Wong, a small but highly respected law firm specializing in corporate structures and financial transactions. Kate Wong had been a year ahead of me at Harvard Law, and while we weren't close friends, we shared a mutual respect. "This is creative," Kate said after reviewing my proposal, "and entirely legal, provided we maintain proper corporate separation between the entities." That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. She set the documents aside, studying me with professional curiosity. "May I ask what's driving this particular structure?" "It's unusually complex for a straightforward debt consolidation." I considered how much to share, then decided that Kate's expertise would be more valuable if she understood the context. "I'm going through a divorce. My husband and his new partner have agreed to assume all our marital debts as part of the settlement." Understanding dawned in Kate's eyes. "And you're ensuring those debts are properly packaged before the transfer." "Exactly." She nodded slowly. "The documents will be ready by tomorrow afternoon. My associate will reach out if we need any additional information." As I left Kate's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Just landed at Logan. Coming straight to the hospital. Need anything?" I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for her steadfast friendship. "Thanks for coming. Could use decent coffee and a change of clothes from the hotel." The next 12 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Melissa arrived at the hospice with Thai food for Mom, who managed a few bites before the nausea returned. Clean clothes for me, and the fierce loyalty that had defined our friendship since college. "You look better than I expected," she observed as we sat in the hospice cafeteria, picking at reheated pasta. "More focused than devastated." "I am focused," I confirmed, then briefly outlined my plan. Melissa's eyes widened as I explained the financial maneuvers I was orchestrating. "Holy shit, Sarah. That's simultaneously the most brilliant and terrifying thing I've ever heard." "Is it too much?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. Mom said it was morally questionable. "Oh, it's definitely that," Melissa agreed, then grinned. "But it's also perfectly calibrated justice for what he did. He's using the legal system to discard you when you're most vulnerable. You're using the financial system to ensure he understands exactly what he's losing." Her validation steadied me. Melissa had always been my moral compass in many ways, the friend who would tell me hard truths when needed. If she saw my plan as justified rather than vindictive, perhaps it was. "What about the biopsy results?" she asked, her tone softening. "When do you hear?" "Tomorrow afternoon. The surgery's scheduled for next Thursday regardless. They need to remove the mass even if it's benign." Melissa reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "One thing at a time, then. Let's get through tomorrow, and we'll tackle next week, when it comes." I nodded, grateful for her pragmatic approach. One of the hardest lessons of adulthood is that life doesn't pause its crises for our convenience. Challenges rarely arrive in orderly sequence. More often they cascade, overlapping in ways that test not just our resilience, but our ability to compartmentalize, to address each issue discreetly while maintaining a coherent overall strategy. That night, I stayed at the hospice, sleeping fitfully in the recliner beside Mom's bed. Melissa took the small cot in the corner, her quiet presence a comfort in the sterile darkness. Around 3 a.m. I woke to find Mom watching me, her eyes reflecting the dim light from the monitors. "You should get proper rest," she whispered. "Fighting battles requires strength." "I'm fine," I assured her. "How's your pain?" "Manageable. I've been thinking about your father." This surprised me. Mom rarely spoke of my father, the man who had walked out when I was 7, only to die in a car accident 3 years later, leaving behind the insurance policy that had become a point of bitter contention between Mom and his family. "What about him?" "He was a coward," she said simply, walking away when things got difficult. David reminds me of him, choosing the easy path, avoiding the hard conversations. I had never considered the parallel, but it rang true. David's exit strategy, papers left on a counter, a text message explanation, retreat to a hotel, reflected a similar avoidance of emotional responsibility. "The difference," Mom continued, "is that you're not me. I was blindsided, devastated, left with no resources but my own determination. You have knowledge, skills, connections." She smiled faintly. "And a much better understanding of how to make someone regret underestimating you." "I learned from watching you," I said. "You never let his family intimidate you, even when they tried to contest the insurance payout." "That money was for your future," she replied, her voice strengthening. With remembered conviction. "I wasn't going to let them take that from you." Now that same money, invested and grown over decades, would fund my response to another man's abandonment. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Morning brought a flurry of emails and calls confirming various elements of my plan were falling into place. The LLC registration had been expedited and approved. The corporate bank accounts were active. Kate's team had drafted the necessary legal documentation for the debt acquisition and restructuring. At 10 a.m., I received a text from David. "It's been a week, Sarah. The lawyers are asking questions. Can we please just talk? Dinner tomorrow. Your choice of restaurant." I considered ignoring him again, but the next phase of my plan required a different approach. The time for silent treatment had passed. Now I needed to engage carefully, strategically. "Surgery scheduled for next Thursday," I typed. "Benign mass, not cancer. Having dinner with Melissa tomorrow. Could do lunch at Soriana at 1. His reply came almost instantly. "Wonderful news about the diagnosis. Soriana at 1 works. See you then." I pocketed my phone, feeling the first genuine relief I'd experienced in weeks. Despite the turmoil of the divorce and Mom's illness, knowing I wasn't facing cancer treatments was a profound weight lifted. The surgeon would still remove the mass. It was large enough to cause discomfort, but the procedure would be straightforward, the recovery relatively quick. Selecting Soriana was deliberate. It was where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary, where the staff knew us as regulars, where David had connections with the management. Public but comfortable, a place where he would feel confident, where he would assume he controlled the dynamic. I returned to Mom's room to find her meeting with the hospice chaplain, a gentle-voiced woman who visited periodically. I waited in the hallway until their conversation concluded, then rejoined Mom as the chaplain departed with a kind nod in my direction. "I didn't know you were talking to the chaplain," I said, arranging fresh water on her bedside table. "Covering my bases," Mom replied with a hint of her old wry humor. "How's your plotting coming along?" "Well, I'm meeting David for lunch tomorrow to set the next phase in motion." She nodded, her gaze sharpening. "What's your approach?" "Vulnerability." With a hint of resignation, I said. "He expects me to be emotional, distracted, eager to resolve things quickly so I can focus on your care and my health. I'll give him exactly what he expects. While you're actually 3 steps ahead and moving in a different direction entirely." She smiled, a genuine smile that momentarily transformed her gaunt face into something closer to the vibrant woman she'd been before the cancer. That's my girl. That afternoon, I left the hospice briefly to meet Jonathan Weiss, a former classmate who now ran a boutique accounting firm specializing in complex financial structures. Jonathan had been brilliant with numbers, but socially awkward enough that he'd never broken into the elite circles David frequented, which made him perfect for my purposes. "Sarah Chen, my God, it's been what, 15 years?" His eyes widened when I walked into his Cambridge office unannounced. "Something like that," I agreed, accepting his awkward hug. "I need your help, John," discreetly. For the next hour, we discussed the financial aspects of my plan. Jonathan asked precise technical questions, occasionally wincing at the boldness of certain elements, but nodding with professional appreciation at the structure. "It's technically legal," he confirmed when I finished outlining the strategy. "Ethically, gray in places but legally sound, provided you maintain the appropriate corporate veil between entities." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with newfound respect. "David really did a number on you, huh?" "You have no idea," I replied, surprised by the emotion that suddenly threatened to choke me. Jonathan and I had never been close friends, but we'd studied together often enough that he'd seen how besotted I'd been with David Madison, The golden boy, the charismatic future star who'd somehow chosen the serious, intense scholarship student as his girlfriend. For what it's worth, John said quietly, he was always a pretentious ass. We all wondered what you saw in him. I smiled despite myself. Charm, ambition, and great bone structure can be very persuasive when you're 23. Jonathan agreed to work with me, his rates surprisingly reasonable. As I left his office, the sun was setting over the Charles River, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. I stopped for a moment on the bridge, watching the rowers glide through the water with metronomic precision. My phone buzzed. David again. It's been a week, Sarah. The lawyers are asking questions. Can we please just talk? Dinner tomorrow, your choice of restaurant. I considered ignoring him again, but phase 2 required a different approach. The time for silent treatment had passed. Now I needed to engage carefully, strategically. Surgery scheduled for next Thursday. Benign mass, not cancer. Having dinner. With Melissa tomorrow. Could do lunch at Soriana at 1. His reply came almost instantly. Wonderful news about the diagnosis. Soriana at 1 works. See you then. I pocketed my phone, continuing my walk across the bridge. Selecting Soriana was deliberate. It was where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary, where the staff knew us as regulars, where David had connections with the management. Public but comfortable, a place where he would feel confident, where he would assume he controlled the dynamic. That night, I returned to the empty house, our house, for the first time in days. I'd been staying in a hotel near the hospice center, avoiding the painful emptiness of the home we'd built together. But now I needed to gather certain documents to prepare for tomorrow's performance. The house felt different, as if David's betrayal had altered its very atmosphere. I moved through the rooms like a visitor in a museum, noting the gaps where he'd removed his favorite books from the shelves, the empty spaces where certain photographs had stood. In my bedroom, I opened the safe hidden behind the abstract, painting David had always hated. Inside were our important documents, property deeds, insurance policies, the prenuptial agreement we'd signed at his insistence, despite my having few assets to protect at the time. I removed what I needed, then turned to my closet. For tomorrow's lunch, I would need the right armor. My fingers found the Chanel suit I'd worn to David's partnership ceremony 3 years ago. Dove gray with black trim, elegant, but not flashy. He'd always appreciated that I knew how to dress the part of a law partner's wife. Stylish enough to reflect well on him, but never ostentatious enough to outshine him. As I laid out the suit, my phone rang. Not David this time, but the hospice. Center. My heart stuttered as I answered. Ms. Chen, it's Dr. Lakeland from hospice. Your mother has taken a significant turn. Her breathing has changed, and we're seeing signs that transition may be beginning. You might want to come in. The transition, such a gentle euphemism for the approach of death. I'll be right there, I said, already reaching for my keys. The night that followed was a vigil of whispered reassurances and gentle touch. Mom drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing me, sometimes speaking to people long gone. Her own mother, my father, childhood friends. By dawn, her breathing had stabilized somewhat, though Dr. Lakeland warned me the reprieve was likely temporary. Days, not weeks, he said kindly, but she's fighting hard. She always has, I replied, brushing Mom's thin hair back from her forehead. I called Mira from the hospice hallway, explaining the situation. We may need to accelerate certain aspects of the plan, I told her. My mother likely won't last the week. I'm sorry, Mira said, genuine compassion in her voice. Do you want to postpone the meeting with David? I considered the question, watching a family down the hall receive what appeared to be difficult. News from another doctor. No, I decided. In fact, this development works in our favor. I'll see him as planned. When I ended the call, I found Dr. Lakeland waiting to speak with me. Your mother's DNR is in order, he confirmed, and her wishes regarding extraordinary measures are clear. Is there anything else you need from our team? I thought of the conversation Mom and I had had just yesterday, her blessing for my plan, her understanding of the justice I sought. No, I said quietly. She's made her wishes very clear. By noon, Mom had stabilized enough that I felt comfortable, leaving for my lunch with David. I changed into the Chanel suit in the hospice's small bathroom, applied makeup to disguise the exhaustion of the night's vigil, and steeled myself for the performance ahead. As I drove to Soriana, I mentally rehearsed the role I needed to play: the wounded but dignified wife, the woman too preoccupied with personal crises to focus on legal strategies, the soon-to-be ex who just wanted things resolved quickly and painlessly. It was perhaps not entirely a performance. Part of me did want this over with, did want to sign those papers and never see David Madison's handsome, treacherous face again. But that part was overruled by the strategist, the planner, the woman who understood that sometimes justice required patience. And so I parked near the restaurant, checked my reflection once more, and prepared to face the husband who had discarded me like an asset whose value had depreciated. David, who had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to anticipate their moves in negotiations, was about to discover that he'd never truly known his wife at all. Life rarely unfolds according to plan. The path we envision for ourselves, love, career, family, security, can vanish in an instant, replaced by terrain so unfamiliar we barely recognize ourselves navigating it. But within this disorientation lies a profound opportunity. When everything is stripped away, when the scaffolding of our carefully constructed lives collapses, we discover what truly forms our foundation. For 15 years, I had defined myself largely through my marriage, through my role as David's supportive partner. Now, facing its dissolution under the cruelest circumstances, I was rediscovering capabilities long dormant: the strategic thinking, the analytical precision, the calculating patience that had once made me a rising star in finance before I'd redirected those talents toward building David's career. As I prepared to meet him for lunch, to begin the next phase of my carefully orchestrated response to his betrayal, I felt not just anger or grief, but a strange, almost exhilarating clarity. The woman walking into Soriana was not the same woman who had found divorce papers on her kitchen counter a week ago. That woman had been shocked, devastated, momentarily broken. This woman was focused, determined, and 3 steps ahead in a game David didn't yet realize they were playing. They say success is the best revenge, but sometimes the most satisfying success comes not from outperforming someone else's expectations, but from reclaiming your own power in a situation designed to strip it from you. David had calculated that my mother's illness and my health scare would leave me too vulnerable to fight for what I deserved. He was about to discover how profoundly he had miscalculated. 6 months later, I sat on the veranda of my rented villa in Santorini, watching the Mediterranean sunset paint the white buildings in shades of gold and rose. My laptop was open to a secure email from Jonathan containing his quarterly update. on what he playfully called the Madison financial situation. First structured payment came due last month, his email read. Paid on time, but not without consequences. Sources at Boston Capital Partners indicate Lauren had to liquidate a significant portion of her tech portfolio at a loss to cover it. David's been passed over for the managing partner position at Colton and Byrne. Rumor has it the firm was concerned about his financial instability. I sipped my chilled white wine, feeling not the vindictive thrill I might have expected, but a calm satisfaction. The plan had worked exactly as designed, not to destroy them completely, but to ensure they felt the weight of consequence with every financial move they made. My phone chimed with a FaceTime call from Melissa. "You're still disgustingly tan," she complained good-naturedly when I answered. Boston winter showed in her pale complexion and the heavy sweater she wore. "When are you coming home?" "Is it home anymore?" I asked, genuinely curious about my own answer. "Well, your condo renovation should be finished next month," she reminded me. "Unless you've fallen in love with some sexy Greek fisherman and plan to become a Mediterranean housewife." I laughed, adjusting my position to catch the last rays of sunlight. "No fisherman, sexy or otherwise. Just peace. Clarity." The past 6 months had been transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated when I'd impulsively headed to the airport that day. After a month in Santorini recovering from surgery, I'd traveled slowly through Southeast Asia, then to Australia, and finally back to Europe. Along the way, I'd rediscovered parts of myself that had been submerged during my marriage. My love of photography, my interest in local economies, my ability to navigate unfamiliar situations with confidence. "Have you heard anything?" Melissa asked carefully. We both knew she was asking about David. "Jonathan keeps me updated," I replied, angling the phone to show her my view. The debt is doing exactly what it was designed to do, creating a constant, inescapable pressure that colors every financial decision they make. "And does that make you happy?" Her tone wasn't judgmental, just curious. I considered the question. Not happy exactly. Validated maybe. He treated our relationship, 15 years of marriage, as disposable. Now he's facing consequences. That can't be easily discarded. Melissa nodded. "Fair enough. Now, business talk. Have you thought more about Jonathan's proposal?" During my 3rd month of travel, Jonathan had approached me with an unexpected business opportunity. Phoenix Capital Management, the company I'd created for my revenge plan, had caught the attention of several serious financial players who were impressed by its innovative debt restructuring approach. I admitted. "I'm flying to London next week to meet with potential investors. Turns out my method of financial revenge has applications in legitimate debt management and corporate restructuring." "From revenge plot to business empire," Melissa laughed. "Only you, Sarah." After we hung up, I remained on the veranda, watching darkness settle over the caldera. My life had taken a direction I could never have anticipated when I found those divorce papers on my kitchen counter less than a year ago. The sudden chime of an email alert drew my attention back to the laptop. The sender's name made my breath catch. David Madison. For a moment, my finger hovered over the delete button. Then curiosity won out. "Sarah," the email began without preamble. "I've respected your desire for no communication these past months. Recent developments compel me to break that silence. Lauren and I have separated. The financial situation you engineered has taken its toll, not just economically, but on our relationship. I'm not writing to blame you or seek sympathy. but to acknowledge that I'm beginning to understand the magnitude of what I did to you. The casual cruelty, the thoughtless timing, the betrayal of our years together. I see it now, through the lens of consequences. This isn't an attempt at reconciliation. Too much has been broken for that. It's simply an acknowledgement of truth. You deserved better than what I gave you. The debt I'm paying isn't just financial, it's moral, and it should be. David. I closed the laptop without replying. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. David's words stirred complex emotions, not regret for my actions, but perhaps a softening of the hard knot of anger I'd carried for so long. My phone chimed with a text from Jonathan. London investors confirmed for next Thursday. They're very interested in the Phoenix model. This could be big, Sarah. I smiled. To myself, typing back a quick confirmation. The revenge that had initially motivated Phoenix Capital's creation had evolved into something unexpected. A genuine business opportunity built on my financial acumen and strategic thinking. The skills David had dismissed as I'd supported his career, now positioning me for success in my own right. The next morning, I woke early and hiked down to the small secluded beach below my villa. The Mediterranean stretched before me, endless blue meeting endless sky. I waded into the cool water, feeling the gentle push and pull of the waves against my legs. For the first time since Mom's death, since David's betrayal, since the surgery and the divorce and the elaborate revenge, I felt completely present in my own body, my own life, not defined by what had been done to me or what I had done in response, but simply by who I was in this moment. Sarah Chen, 43 years old, standing at the edge of a new beginning. I thought about David's email, about the separation he'd mentioned. Their relationship had crumbled under the weight of financial pressure just as I'd predicted. The debt I'd engineered had become a constant strain, eroding their connection as surely as water erodes stone. Later that day, as I packed for London, another email arrived, this one from Lauren Westfield. I won't pretend to deserve your time, she wrote, but I need to say this. I never fully understood what David did to you until he began doing similar things to me. When the financial pressure increased, the casual dismissal, the subtle undermining, the way he makes you doubt your own perceptions. You calculated your revenge perfectly, not just in the debt itself, but in forcing us to face each other's true characters under stress. I'm selling my Beacon Hill property to help clear some of the restructured debt. It seems you'll be getting your pound of flesh after all. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for my role in causing you pain. Lauren. I sat on the edge of my bed, surprisingly moved by her words. Not enough to respond or offer absolution, but enough to recognize the deeper success of my plan. Beyond the financial consequences, I'd created a situation that revealed David's true character to the woman who had helped him betray me. The London meetings exceeded all expectations. By the following week, Phoenix Capital Management had secured $10 million in initial investment to develop specialized debt restructuring products for corporate clients. Jonathan would manage the Boston operations while I established a European office. To Phoenix Rising, Jonathan toasted at our celebration dinner in Mayfair, raising his champagne glass with a grin. To unexpected second acts, I amended, clinking my glass against his. 2 years to the day after finding those divorce papers on my kitchen counter, I stood in the lobby of Phoenix Capital's new London headquarters, watching our logo, a stylized Phoenix in flight, being installed on the wall. We'd grown to a staff of 28, with offices in Boston, London, and Singapore. The debt restructuring model I'd created for my revenge had been refined into a legitimate financial service that helped struggling companies reorganize their obligations and avoid bankruptcy. My assistant handed me the morning financial news summary as I walked to my office. Buried in the Boston business section was a small item about Colton and Byrne downsizing their corporate office space and letting several partners go, including David Madison. I felt no joy at his downfall, no vindictive satisfaction, only a calm acknowledgement that consequences, both financial and professional, had finally caught up to him. The debt trap I'd set had done its work, leaving him professionally vulnerable when the law firm faced financial challenges. That evening, as I walked along the Thames, watching London light up for the night, I drafted a mental email to my mother, telling her about Phoenix Capital's success, about the foundation I'd established in her name to help single mothers return, to education, about the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. "You were right, Mom," I whispered to the night air. "The best revenge wasn't just making them pay. It was showing myself what I'm capable of building on my own." My phone buzzed with an email notification. The London Business Journal wanted an interview for their Women in Finance special edition. The subject line made me smile. "Rising from the Ashes: How Sarah Chen Built a Financial Empire from Personal Catastrophe." They had no idea how literal that description was. Perhaps someday I'd tell the full story, of divorce papers on a kitchen counter, of a dying mother's encouragement, of debts restructured into weapons, and of the unexpected liberation that came from calculated revenge. But for now, I was content with the knowledge that some debts can never be fully repaid, but they can be transformed into something powerful, something constructive, something that ultimately serves a purpose beyond simple retribution. David and Lauren had replaced me overnight, thinking they could simply transfer my debts to their new life without consequence. They'd been wrong, and in proving that, I'd found something far more valuable than revenge. I'd found myself. 5 years. After the divorce, I returned to Boston for the first time. The city skyline looked both familiar and foreign as my car crossed the Charles River. New buildings had risen, old landmarks remained, and I felt oddly detached from the place I'd once called home. Phoenix Capital now occupied the entire 32nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower, a far cry from the shell company I'd created for my revenge plan. Jonathan met me in the lobby, his familiar, awkward grin now accompanied by the confidence of a successful CFO. "The prodigal founder returns," he joked, embracing me. "The team's excited to finally meet the mysterious Sarah Chen in person." I'd built the company remotely, running European operations while maintaining a carefully cultivated distance from Boston. Today marked my first official visit to our American headquarters. "How does it feel to be back?" Jonathan asked as we rode the elevator. "Surreal," I admitted, "like visiting a previous life." The Phoenix offices were sleek and modern, open workspaces, glass-walled conference rooms, and our logo prominently displayed throughout. 46 employees looked up expectantly as Jonathan led me through the main floor. "Everyone, as promised, Sarah Chen, our founder and CEO," he announced. The applause caught me off guard. These people knew me only through video conferences, and my reputation in the financial industry. They didn't know about the divorce, the betrayal, the calculated revenge that had birthed the company. To them, I was simply the visionary who'd pioneered a revolutionary approach to debt restructuring. After the office tour and meetings, Jonathan and I had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, not Soriana, where I'd had that fateful lunch with David years ago, but a quiet family-owned place where we wouldn't be recognized. "So," Jonathan said once we'd ordered, "are you going to ask, or should I just tell you?" I smiled, appreciating his directness. "Tell me." David's working at a small firm in Providence. Took him 18 months to find a position after Colton and burn. The remaining debt still has him underwater. He'll be paying it off for another decade at least. Jonathan swirled his wine. Lauren remarried last year. Tech entrepreneur from Seattle. She managed to negotiate a settlement with the creditors on her portion of the debt. Took a significant hit to her portfolio, but she's largely free of it now. I nodded, absorbing the information with surprising emotional neutrality. And the house? Foreclosed 3 years ago, sold at auction for less than they owed. The house where I'd planned to grow old with David, where we'd hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings, where I'd found divorce papers on the kitchen counter, gone to strangers at a bank auction. "Does any of this still matter to you?" Jonathan asked carefully. I considered the question. "Not in the way it once did," I finally answered. "It's like reading about characters in a book I put down years ago." After dinner, on impulse, I asked the driver to take me past our old neighborhood. The elegant Beacon Hill townhouses stood unchanged, timeless in their red brick beauty. We slowed as we approached what had been our home. The house looked different. New paint, landscaped, front garden, warm lights glowing from windows that once framed my life. A young couple emerged, laughing as they juggled shopping bags and keys. They looked happy, unaware of the history their home contained. "Keep driving," I told the driver softly. Back at my hotel, I found an email waiting from Melissa. She'd moved to San Francisco 3 years ago, but remained my closest friend and confidant. "Saw the Forbes article," she wrote. "The Debt Whisperer is quite the nickname. Let me know how it feels to be back in Boston. Still hosting the Phoenix Charity Gala tomorrow night? Call me. I want all the details." The Forbes profile had been unexpected. A feature on female founders that positioned me as a financial innovator who'd turned personal setback into professional triumph. They'd gotten the broad strokes right, but missed the vengeful catalyst that had started everything. The next evening, I stood at the podium in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, addressing the 300 guests at Phoenix Capital's annual charity gala. The Elizabeth Chen Foundation, named for my mother, had raised over $4 million for single mothers pursuing higher education, funding scholarships, childcare, and housing assistance. "Transformation often begins in our darkest moments," I told the audience. "When we think we've lost everything, we sometimes discover what we're truly capable of building." My gaze swept across the elegant crowd. Business leaders, financial professionals, philanthropists, and stopped cold on a familiar face near the back of the room. David. He looked older, the silver at his temples now spread throughout his hair. Our eyes met briefly before I continued my speech, my voice steady despite the unexpected jolt of seeing him. After the formal program, as guests mingled and donated generously to the foundation, I felt a presence at my elbow. "Congratulations on everything you've built," David said quietly. "It's remarkable." I turned to face him, surprised by my own calm. "Thank you. I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "I'm with Hargrove and Associates now, junior partner. My boss purchased a table for the gala." The irony was exquisite. David. Attending an event celebrating the company born from my revenge against him, unknowingly contributing to my success through his firm's donation. "How are you, Sarah?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight of unspoken history. "I'm well," I replied honestly. "Very well, actually." He nodded, glancing around at the evidence of my success. "I can see that." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to hate you, for what you did with the debt. I tried to, for years. And now?" "Now?" I prompted when he paused. "Now I understand it was exactly what I deserved." His smile was rueful. 15 years of marriage, disposed of in the worst possible way. I'm not proud of the man I was then. A waiter passed with champagne. I declined. David took a glass. "Lauren and I lasted less than a year after the signing," he continued. "The financial strain was just the beginning. Once that perfect image cracked, we discovered we didn't actually like each other very much." "I heard she remarried," I said neutrally. He nodded. "She found someone better suited to her. Someone who doesn't discard people when they become inconvenient." The self-awareness in his tone surprised me. "And you?" I asked, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Rebuilding, slowly. The debt you engineered?" He gave a short laugh. "It's quite the masterpiece, My financial advisor still calls it the most elegantly vengeful structure he's ever seen. It became the foundation for Phoenix's business model," I acknowledged. "Minus the vengeful intent, of course." "Of course," he echoed, his eyes holding mine. Jonathan appeared at my side, protectively professional. "Ms. Chen, the Singapore investors are eager to speak with you." I nodded, turning back to David. "If you'll excuse me." He reached out as if to touch my arm, then stopped himself. I'm sorry, Sarah. Not because of the consequences, but because what I did was wrong. You deserved better. 5 years ago, those words might have meant something. Now they were simply facts, acknowledged too late to matter. "Yes," I agreed simply. I did. I moved through the remainder of the evening in a strange state of detachment, accepting congratulations and discussing business opportunities, while part of my mind processed the unexpected encounter. Later that night, alone in my hotel suite, overlooking Boston Harbor, I opened my laptop and logged into the secure Phoenix system. A few keystrokes brought up the file I sought. David Madison's debt structure, still active, still slowly draining his financial resources year after year. My finger hovered over the keyboard as I considered the options before me. With a few commands, I could adjust the terms, ease the burden that had been following him for 5 years, release him from the consequences I'd so carefully engineered. The David I'd seen tonight was not the man who had discarded me so callously. That man had been humbled, transformed by the very mechanism of my revenge. The debt had done its work, not just financially but personally. He had changed, so had I. I typed quickly, entering the necessary commands, then sat back as the system processed my instructions. A notification appeared, confirming the changes. The debt structure had been modified, interest rates reduced, payment terms extended. Not eliminated, that would have negated the justice of it, but transformed into something more manageable. I closed the laptop, feeling neither triumph nor regret, just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finally ending on my terms. In the morning, I would return to London, to the life and company I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Boston would remain in my past, a place I'd once called home, the birthplace of both my greatest pain and my most significant transformation. David would receive notification of the debt adjustment within days. He would understand the significance of the gesture, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that the scales had balanced, that justice had been served. As I stood at the window, watching Boston's lights reflect on the harbor waters, I thought of how far I'd come from that shocked, devastated woman who had found divorce papers on her kitchen counter. The revenge I'd planned had succeeded beyond my expectations, not just in making David pay, but in forging me into someone stronger, more capable, more successful than I'd ever been as his wife. Sometimes, I reflected, the most powerful response to betrayal isn't just making the betrayer suffer. It's ensuring they witness your transformation into someone they can never touch again. In that, my revenge was truly complete. 7 years. After the divorce, Phoenix Capital Management hosted its annual Global Leadership Summit in Singapore. As CEO, I opened the conference with a keynote on transformative financial structures in uncertain markets. 200 of our employees from offices in 12 countries filled the hotel ballroom, a testament to how far we'd come from our unlikely beginnings. Financial innovation often emerges from crisis, I told the audience. The most powerful solutions are born when conventional approaches fail us. No one except Jonathan knew just how personally I had tested that theory. After the keynote, during a brief moment alone in the executive lounge, I checked my secure messaging system. Jonathan had sent our quarterly Madison update, a tradition that had evolved from detailed financial surveillance to brief factual notes. David's firm made him full partner last month, the message read. Debt restructure you authorized 2 years ago has stabilized his situation. He's purchased a modest condo in Providence. FYI, Lauren's tech husband took her company public. Stock opened at $87. I closed the message without responding. These updates had become increasingly infrequent and increasingly irrelevant to my life. While I never requested Jonathan stop sending them, we both recognized they served little purpose now beyond historical curiosity. Ms. Chen, my assistant appeared at the doorway. The panel on emerging markets begins in 5 minutes. I nodded, gathering my materials. Thank you, Maya. As I moved through the conference, greeting colleagues and discussing business strategies, I reflected on how thoroughly I had reinvented myself. The woman who had once defined herself as David Madison's supportive wife now led a global financial firm with assets under management exceeding $2 billion. The revenge that had initially fueled Phoenix's creation had been transformed into legitimate business innovation recognized throughout the industry. That evening, I had dinner with our Asia-Pacific leadership team at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Singapore's spectacular skyline. As the conversation flowed around investment opportunities and market projections, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. The sender's name made me pause. Lauren Westfield Jenkins. I excused myself and stepped away to read the message privately. Sarah, you don't owe me your attention, but I hope you'll read this. My husband's company is launching a foundation focused on supporting women entrepreneurs after divorce or major life transitions. Given Phoenix Capital's similar initiatives through the Elizabeth Chen Foundation, we'd like to explore potential collaboration. This isn't about making amends, that ship sailed long ago, but about creating something meaningful from our shared history. The financial education program you've built for women navigating post-divorce finances is exactly the kind of model we'd like to expand globally. If you're willing to discuss this, I'd appreciate the opportunity. Regards, Lauren. I stared at the message, caught between disbelief and grudging admiration for her audacity. The woman who had helped destroy my marriage now wanted to partner with me professionally, leveraging the very success I'd built from that destruction. Back at my hotel suite, I drafted and deleted 3 different responses before setting my phone aside. This required careful consideration, not an emotional reaction. The next morning, as I jogged along Singapore's Marina Bay, the first hints of dawn coloring the sky, I gained clarity about Lauren's proposal. The businesswoman in me recognized the potential benefits: expanded resources for the foundation, greater reach for our programs, positive publicity. The woman who had orchestrated an elaborate financial revenge balked at any collaboration with Lauren. But 7 years had passed. I was no longer defined by what David and Lauren had done to me, but by what I had built afterward. After my run, I composed a brief professional response. Lauren, thank you for reaching out. The Elizabeth Chen Foundation would be interested in learning more about your initiative. My executive director, Amara Wilson, will contact you to arrange an initial discussion. Sarah Chen, CEO, Phoenix Capital Management. Neither rejection nor enthusiasm, simply business. Later that day, between summit sessions, I called Melissa, who now headed our San Francisco office. Lauren Westfield reached out about a foundation partnership, I told her without preamble. You're kidding, Melissa replied, her tone incredulous. The audacity of that woman. It's been 7 years, I said, surprising myself with my measured response. The foundation work is important. If her resources can help more women, does it matter where they come from? Look at you, all evolved and mature, Melissa teased, though I detected genuine admiration in her voice. Can I remind you that this is the woman who helped your husband replace you while your mother was dying? Trust me, I haven't forgotten, I assured her. But I'm not that wounded woman anymore. Haven't been for a long time. So you're actually considering it? I'm considering what serves the foundation best, I clarified. Let Amara handle the preliminary discussions. If it has potential, I'll decide then whether I can separate the personal history from the professional opportunity. After ending the call, I rejoined the conference, focusing on Phoenix's future rather than my past. By the summit's conclusion 3 days later, we had finalized expansion plans for South America and the Middle East, approved a new debt restructuring product for distressed municipalities, and recruited 3 top financial analysts from our competitors. On my flight back to London, I reviewed the Foundation's latest impact report. The Elizabeth Chen Foundation had funded education for over 700 single mothers, provided emergency housing for 200 families in crisis, and launched a financial literacy program that had reached thousands of women navigating post-divorce finances. Mom would have been proud of how her insurance money had been leveraged, first as the seed capital for my revenge, then as the foundation for a philanthropic legacy that bore her name. She had always believed in poetic justice. A month after the Singapore summit, I received a formal proposal from Lauren's husband's foundation. Amara had vetted it thoroughly and recommended proceeding with a limited pilot collaboration. The synergies are undeniable, Amara explained during our video call. Their resources combined with our programs could double our impact within 18 months. And Sarah, she hesitated. Lauren has offered to recuse herself from any direct involvement if that would make you more comfortable. I appreciated the consideration but recognized it as unnecessary. That won't be required. This is business, not personal. The words came easily because they were true. Lauren Westfield Jenkins was no longer the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. She was simply another business contact, neither friend nor enemy. The pilot program launched 3 months later, focusing on financial education for women going through divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had replaced me was now funding programs inspired by the revenge I'd enacted against her. Life's circles were sometimes perfect in their symmetry. In December, Phoenix Capital opened its newest office in Toronto. During the celebration, Jonathan pulled me aside, champagne flute in hand. "Have you seen this?" he asked, showing me his tablet. On the screen was a business news article profiling David's law firm's expansion into international markets. "No," I admitted. "I haven't been keeping track." "There's a quote from him I thought you might find interesting," Jonathan said, scrolling to highlight a paragraph. David's words appeared in neat digital print. "My approach to client relationships was transformed by personal experience with financial restructuring. When you've navigated complex debt obligations personally, you develop a different perspective on what clients need during financial challenges." I handed the tablet back to Jonathan, a small smile playing at my lips. Sounds like he learned something after all. "From the best in the business," Jonathan replied, raising his glass in a subtle toast. Later that evening, after the celebration wound down, I stood alone on the balcony of our new offices, looking out at Toronto's winter skyline. Snow fell gently, muffling the city sounds. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Saw the press? Release about the foundation collaboration with Lauren's group. You okay with all this?" I considered the question, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. "More than okay," I typed back. "It feels like the final piece falling into place." And it was true. The revenge that had once consumed my thoughts had evolved into something I could never have anticipated: a successful global company, a foundation helping women rebuild their lives, and eventually, a strange kind of peace. David and Lauren had replaced me overnight, thinking they could simply transfer my debts to their new life without consequence. Instead, those debts had become the catalyst for my transformation, and ultimately their own. The circle was complete. The debt, financial, emotional, moral, had been paid in full. And I, Sarah Chen, was finally completely free. 10 years to the day after finding those divorce papers on my kitchen counter, I stood at the podium of Harvard Business School's MacArthur Auditorium, addressing the graduating class as their commencement speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd once deferred my own ambitions to support David's career at this very institution. Transformation rarely follows the path we expect, I told the sea of eager faces before me. Often, our greatest innovations emerge from our deepest setbacks. From my vantage point, I could see Phoenix Capital's Chief Operating Officer, Amara Wilson, sitting among the distinguished guests. Beside her was Melissa, who now headed our North American operations, and Jonathan, my ever-loyal CFO. 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment or these allies who had helped build an empire from the ashes of betrayal. After the ceremony, as I chatted with faculty and students at the reception, Harvard's Dean of Business approached with a familiar figure in tow. "Ms. Chen, I believe you know Professor Madison. He's been leading our course on ethics and corporate restructuring this semester." David looked older but well, distinguished gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his posture still straight, confident. He extended his hand professionally. "Congratulations on your speech, Sarah. It was powerful." I accepted. His handshake, noting the absence of the emotional jolt such contact might once have triggered. "Thank you, David. I didn't realize you were teaching here." "Just this semester," he explained, "a visiting professorship alongside my work in Providence." The dean excused himself to greet other guests, leaving us in a moment of unexpected privacy. A decade of history hung between us, simultaneously significant and irrelevant. "Your foundation's work with women navigating post-divorce finances is remarkable," David said. "I actually reference it in my ethics class as a model program." "That's unexpected," I admitted. He smiled slightly. "I've been following Phoenix's evolution for years. What you've built is extraordinary, Sarah." "Thank you," I replied, genuine but reserved. "The debt restructuring you engineered," he hesitated, then continued with surprising candor. "It was brilliant, Sarah. Brutal, but brilliant. It took me 3 years just to understand its full complexity, and another 2 years to stabilize." "Your finances," I added, letting him know I was still informed about his situation. He nodded, accepting this without surprise. "The irony is that struggling with that debt made me a better lawyer, a better teacher. It forced me to understand financial frameworks from the client's perspective." A young graduate approached, eager to speak with me, and David stepped back with a slight nod of acknowledgement. Our brief conversation, likely our last, had closed a circle neither of us had anticipated. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at a restaurant near campus for the Phoenix team who had attended the commencement. As we celebrated with champagne, Melissa leaned over to me. "So you and David looked civil. No bloodshed, no financial warfare. How disappointing," she teased. 10 years is a long time," I replied. "The woman who engineered that revenge barely exists anymore." "Oh, she exists," Melissa countered with a knowing smile. "She's just evolved into something even more formidable." Later that night, in my hotel suite, I received a text from an unknown number. "The student who approached you after our conversation today was Jessica Martinez. She's writing her thesis on financial resilience after divorce. Your foundation changed her mother's life. Thought you should know. David." I saved the message but didn't respond. Some acknowledgments required no reply. The next morning, before flying back to London, I made an unplanned detour. The taxi driver seemed confused when I gave him the address of a cemetery on the outskirts of Boston, but he drove in silence, respecting my privacy. Mom's grave was simple but elegant, a black granite headstone with her name and the dates that bookended her life. I placed white peonies, her favorite, against the stone. "It's been 10 years, Mom," I said quietly. 10 years since everything fell apart and somehow put me on the path to building something stronger. The morning air was cool, the cemetery peaceful. Birds sang in the trees overhead as I told my mother about Phoenix Capital's global expansion, about the foundation that bore her name, about the thousands of women whose lives had been changed through our programs. "You were right about revenge," I admitted to her silent stone. "It wasn't just about making them pay. It was about discovering what I could build from nothing." As I turned to leave, I noticed a small arrangement of yellow roses already placed beside my peonies. Attached was a card that simply read, "To the mother of an extraordinary woman. Thank you for raising her to be stronger than the challenges she faced. LWJ." Lauren Westfield Jenkins had somehow known I would visit today. The gesture, acknowledging my mother's role in shaping the woman who had orchestrated her financial downfall, was unexpected and strangely moving. On the flight back to London, I reviewed Phoenix Capital's latest quarterly reports. We had expanded to 15 countries. Our foundation work had reached over 10,000 women, and our innovative debt restructuring models had been adopted by financial institutions worldwide. None of it would have existed if David hadn't left those divorce papers on our kitchen counter 10 years ago. None of it would have emerged if Lauren hadn't agreed to take on my debts, thinking it a simple transaction, rather than the trigger for an elaborate financial trap. My phone buzzed with an email from Amara. The Jenkins Foundation has formally proposed expanding our collaboration to include a global scholarship program for women in finance. Their initial commitment is $10 million over 5 years. Lauren has requested a planning meeting in London next month. How would you like to proceed? I smiled to myself, appreciating the continuing ironies of my professional connection to Lauren, the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, now helping fund educational opportunities for women facing similar challenges. Schedule the meeting, I replied. I'll attend personally. That evening, as my plane crossed the Atlantic, I opened my laptop to review a draft of my upcoming book, Phoenix Rising: Financial Strategies for Women in Transition. The publisher had urged me to include more personal background to explain what had inspired my passion for helping women navigate financial challenges after divorce. I'd been reluctant, preferring to keep my professional success separate from my personal history. But perhaps the time had come to acknowledge how the two were inextricably linked, how a perfect storm of betrayal, grief, and calculated revenge had transformed into a global financial empire and philanthropic legacy. 10 years ago, I found divorce papers on my kitchen counter while my mother was dying in hospice care. My husband had replaced me overnight, thinking he could simply transfer my debts to his new life without consequence. What followed was not just a divorce, but a financial reckoning that would change the trajectory of all our lives. This is not a story of revenge, though it began that way. It's a story of transformation, of debts paid and rebalanced, of power reclaimed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.